everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on episode 16, is that right? Yes, of My Hero Academia, season 6. It's hard, because when I look on Crunchyroll, it always has like the episodes, like episode 129 or something like that, and I don't keep up with those numbers, but man, my voice feels a lot better. I still have a little bit of a cough, but I am coming off the tail end of my cold, and I feel much, much better than I did last week. And so, which I am ashamed that I didn't feel as great recording last week's episode, because Tartarus, the jailbreak, it was so good. It was wonderful. All for One being as hammy as he possibly can be, and then setting up just that things are a little bit, just a wee bit dour for our hero society right now. And so, as a manga reader, going into this part of the series, we're dealing with the aftermath of the war arc between the Liberation Front, the League of Villains, as well as the heroes. And so you have a lot of loose ends that need to be tying up, right? We have Hawks, who we last saw was kind of decimated from his attack from Dabi. We have Endeavor, who just went into surgery last episode. Deku's in a coma. Bakugo's come out to find out all the stuff about Deku. Shoto's dealing with the fact that his family's getting flack from Dabi, and that he's realized Dabi and him have more in common than he once thought. And then the other Class 1A and Class 1B students are reeling from the deaths of heroes that have been their mentors. And so there's a lot of doom and gloom in the air, and Horikoshi kind of just plays it up because he knows exactly what to do with it, and it's like, So there are a lot of things in the manga I'm looking forward to being animated, but this part of the series is hard. It's not great. So, and seeing it last episode, seeing those voice actors like just acting out like Midnight's death, it was hard to watch. It was painful. I was like, oof. I'm like, and they're probably going to show a recap of it because they want to make us suffer. So, But I'm really excited to see what ends up happening this episode and what all we get to, because there are certain beats I'm excited for. We've met a mysterious lady with purple hair. She freed Overhaul from the prison. What we doing with that? What's All for One's goals? Spinner looks like he's just, what did he sign up for? Stain's loose. So it's just like there's so much chaos going on right now. And I remember reading the manga thinking, this is just a big ball of just a hot mess. And so what do we do with that? So I hope y'all are excited. I definitely am. But we're not going to waste any more time. We are going to dive in and see what happens. So we are going to start episode 16 of season 6 of My Hero Academia. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. And let's do this. Whew, this episode's a lot. And I imagine if you are anime only, it would hit a lot harder and you'd be like, oh crap, because that is the one regret I have having read the manga, is that I look forward to seeing the manga adapted into episodes like these, where you get to see all these emotional beats with musical scores and being animated and the voice acting. It does add a lot to it, and especially in some moments of this episode, I was like, okay, good. Stuff that I kind of found was not as effective in the manga because you can't hear the voice acting works a lot better in this version. But man, the one thing I regret is, since I knew what was coming, essentially, I was like, yeah, it's great seeing it, but I can only imagine the anime onlys being like, this is just, because this episode is a lot, and I have a feeling that next episode is going to be a lot too, because Ray's come in being like, we need to talk about Toya. We need to talk about Toya, talk about Dabi, where we go to from here. Yeah, it's great. So I'm getting past the recap stuff, although hearing Bakugo say, if he dies, I'll kill him, is always a fun time when you get past the OP into this. Going into this, Hawks' character was so mysterious. And so, ever since we found out Dabi, which, y'all, I don't know if I talked about it in the name reveal early on in the season. The whole thing about Hawks and Dabi knowing who he was such a big deal in the manga at the time it came out, because everybody was like, well, we've not known about Toya. What's going on? We've not known about Hawks. What's going on? What's his story? How does Dabi know? How does all this add up? And there's so much mystery surrounding it. So when these chapters come out explaining Hawks' background, Kigo's background, it suddenly all adds up, and It's so interesting, right? And I feel like I need to talk more about it next episode, because if we get into Toya's backstory, I feel like I need to wait and talk about it then, because Ray's going to talk about Toya, right? She's like, we need to talk about Toya. We need to talk about the family. So we're probably going to get some information about that. I need to save a few things for then, right? But it's so fascinating because Hawks' background is that his dad was a thief. His dad was scum and was like such a terrible person. And the thing about it is, like, you could compare Hawks' father with Endeavor in a way. There's major contrast. But the comparison is that both Shoto and Dabi and Hawks did not have the prime father figure growing up. Now, having said that, it is clear that we get some explanation of why Endeavor was like that, his mentality. We see him now moving forward, that he's trying to atone, that he's trying to become a better person. We've said this in other reactions. I don't have the fondest view of Endeavor, honestly. I don't view him in a positive light, mostly because I'm like, you did some real shitty things. But I do appreciate that Horikoshi paints Endeavor very complex, saying like, he's not a villain. Endeavor's not a villain. He's not a bad guy in terms of just having an evil heart. He just makes some really, really bad mistakes and makes some decisions that are not good. And he's having to deal with those now, right? Whereas Kigo's dad is portrayed very antagonistically, like, no, he's just scum. He doesn't care. And the thing about it is, the thing that contrasts Kigo's dad with Endeavor is that his father, the thief, his dad actively says in front of him in like a drunken stupor, he's like, I wish this kid wasn't born. He's the only reason I'm still here with this woman and blah, blah, blah. Like, actively to Kigo's face tells me he wishes he didn't exist. Endeavor, I don't think, would ever say that to any of his children. I think that despite the flaws and mistakes he makes, he would never actively tell his kids, I wish you were never born. And I think that that's where Dabi, again, we'll talk about it later on, I think Dabi assumes that Endeavor didn't want him because he had Shoto. He was like, oh, you've got your masterpiece now. You don't need the rest of us. We're just all just the other kids. And I don't think Endeavor feels that way. I think Endeavor might be partial to Shoto because of his quirk, but I don't think he actively wishes his other kids weren't around, right? We've seen him interact with Fuyumi where he thanks her, being like, hey, thanks for trying to keep this all together. I know I'm doing a really shitty job in some areas as a dad. Thanks for trying to keep us all glued together. Like, he said that back when they had the dinner scene back, last season. And so I don't think Endeavor would wish his kids not to be there. Even Toya. Because he cries over Toya. He's like, I can't fight Dabi. I can't do it. I can't fight my son. He's like, I can't. And that just shows that Endeavor does love Dabi. He does love Toya, but he just can't do it. And so that I like that distinction between both Kigo's dad and Endeavor. I like that that's set up right off the bat in this episode. It's funny because we joke that like what kid that's 8 or 9 watches the news, and I made that joke, but then this is the hero society in this world, and kids are obsessed with heroes. It's a nice connection to Deku. Deku was always watching the news and trying to see All Might. Like, that was Deku's thing. And the thing of it is, Deku didn't have a quirk, so this was for Deku, it was almost like what Kigo talks about, and that it was a separation from reality and fiction. He was like, the heroes felt like they weren't real because they were on the other side of the TV screen. They didn't feel like they really existed. They felt like they were part of some kind of fictional world. And for Deku, it was kind of the same thing. Like, when he viewed All Might, it was part of a world he didn't think he could become a part of. And Hawks feels the same way as a kid. So it's cool seeing that parallel. And the fun thing is that for Deku, he was looking at All Might, and for Hawks, he was looking at Endeavor. And I can't quite remember, I don't think this is a manga spoiler, but I can't quite remember if the manga, I feel like at some point the manga said that Kigo connected more with Endeavor than All Might, because we'll talk about why that is, but he connected more with him always, and he was the one he looked after, because then he sees Endeavor on the screen, like, using his, pure force, taking down poor Elephant Man so he could save the day, right? And then we cut to Hawks, like, on top of the building. I love that imagery that Hawks looks like a little bird perched on top of the skyscraper, like looking down, watching everybody. Like, I love that. It's so bird-like. And it makes me think of him, like, up on the rooftop with Tokiyami. And Tokiyami's, like, so engaged with Hawks because he connects with him. It's great. But God, going back to their house, storylines like these are always very hard because of how real they are. Because as exaggerated as it seems, that you're like, oh, this shack is disgusting. It's littered with garbage. It's gross. No one would ever live in conditions like that. It's based in reality. And the sad thing is that, yeah, there are people that live like this. And it's a wonder, Hawks turns out as well as he does, right? It's a wonder he turns out as well as he does. Because Hawks, one, his dad's ugly. So Hawks clearly got the good looks from the mom. But you have a dad who's abusive and is scum and is just a thief that's just been inconvenienced to stay with, what's her name? Tomo? He calls, and she keeps saying, she's sitting there in like her prison stripe dress saying the TV won't turn on, right? And then, what does he call? I want to say what her name is. And he's like, hurry up and find another job. And you see Hawks going to like the side of the house to hide his Endeavor toy. He's hiding his toy so his dad doesn't take it away, right? That's so sad because it's so real. Like, there's so many kids that are in the same situation and they're just living in filth. Like, it's just disgusting. And Hawk's just hiding like his toy so that his dad doesn't find it. And his dad doesn't care. So, and it's funny because you see the quirks mixed together to make Hawks. His dad has the feathers on his arms. So his dad doesn't have wings. His dad can't fly, but he has the feathers. But then his mom has this, like, it's never really explained in the manga either. She seems like she has some clairvoyancy. She has the two eyeballs floating around her. Like, she can kind of see things and has like more peripheral view, right? And then they just combine these two like kind of not so special quirks that are just kind of like inconveniences more than anything, combined together to make Hawks' quirk that's really powerful. And so it's so symbolic, right? It feels symbolic. But man, Tomi's quirk, he shouldn't have relied on it, that she can see things. I think maybe the manga says that she kind of has some clairvoyancy, which is ironic because she herself is kind of spacey, like she just spaces out. And she's, very, very traumatized in all of this. One, because she's in this abusive relationship, but two, she seems very codependent and clingy, and she's like, please don't run away. Like, that's her whole thing. She's like, don't leave me, don't run away. She doesn't want to be alone. And so it's just like the two worst situations combining. And oddly enough, the miracle that comes out of it is that Hawks is born. And he just happens to be this good kid, right? She just says, don't run away. And they're all broken, right? But I love the visual metaphor of, like, Hawks has his father's eyes, but he looks like his mom. He has his mom's hair and looks. And he kind of has the little bird markings on him. And she says he was captured by Endeavor. I love the visual metaphor of the Endeavor doll glowing. Like, that's his connection, his anchor, that gives him hope, where he's like, my dad who's awful was captured by this hero. He does exist. Like, heroes are real. Like, that inspiration that he gets. And then Tomi decides to run away with him and leave the house. The sad thing is, when they get to the train station where the commission finds them, the sad and very true reality is that she's sitting there kind of mumbling to herself, going on and on about, being hopeless and needing Kigo to go get money. And everybody's walking by her, looking at her, looking slightly concerned, but nobody reaches out to help. And it felt very much like Shigaraki in that situation, where everybody walks past Shigaraki. They know this kid's in trouble, but none of them want to reach out a hand to help. And they do the same thing with Tomi. Nobody offers to help or ask how she is, what's going on. They just all, like, the one woman still on her cell phone walking by, they don't care. They just keep going and nobody offers assistance. And it's really sad. And it's sad that she gets to the point where she's like, I can't make money. Your dad was a thief. You're his son. Don't do the same thing. And that's the sad thing, is that she was just like, just go be like your dad. And Hawks is not that. And I'm glad Hawks doesn't listen to her. He's like, I don't want to be like my father. I want to be a hero like Endeavor. He's like, I didn't want to do that. He uses Endeavor like as a lifeline, saying, I don't want to be like my father. I want to be more than that. And that's when he goes and saves the people outside on the bus, right? Shows he went to go get them food, saved the people, and that's when the Hero Commission noticed and came to her. And the sad thing is, when the Hero Commission, the Safety Commission's like, oh, well, we'll give you support for you and your family if you let us take your kid to make him a hero to use. And she's like, family? Who else do you think there is? Like, that part's so real. It hits you because she's like, I'm by myself. There's nobody else. Like, it's just, oh. And yeah, they took Hawks. And Hawks coming back and telling Genist, he's like, I wanted to become a hero. I wanted to save others. But in doing so, I abandoned my mom. Like, she's said over and over again, don't run away. Don't leave me alone. Don't leave me. And he leaves her to go become a hero and save others. But he completely severs himself from her and doesn't help her in doing so. And in that moment, it kind of becomes clear of how Kigo can connect to Endeavor in what's going on right now, because Kigo understands. He's like, no, he's like, I get what Endeavor's going through in a sense, because he's like, I know what Endeavor is probably feeling. He's like, I feel the guilt now and the pain that I abandoned my mother to pursue this life. Endeavor is dealing with the same thing now. It's come out that he abandoned his family in order to pursue chasing the dream of being the number one hero. So I feel like Kigo connects with Endeavor in terms of that and understands him in terms of that. So it's cool seeing these character connections come together. And then we cut back and get the part about Kigo. One thing this episode does well, and in the manga, Hawks' throat is completely burned, right? From Dabi. It's just like Shoto, again, making these connections where it's burned. But he has this like voice mask that's hooked up to a phone, and it's played very much for humor almost in this episode, where it's like dark humor, because the little device in his hand, it plays like a Microsoft Sam, like, hello. These are words that I pre-recorded, so when I put them together, they sound like speech. Like, it's just him talking naturally. But then he says some, like, really dour and sad things in that voice. And it doesn't quite emotionally hit right. It's almost funny. So while it is humorous that he takes the mask off and sounds like Batman because his voice is, like, cracked and destroyed, he had to do that. Horikoshi needed that to happen for the emotional beat of what Hawks was saying to resonate, because if he had said it through the voice adapter, it wouldn't have had the same emotional impact. So while it seems like a plot convenience that he takes off the mask, I'm like, you should keep that on for your health. For the sake of the anime, it makes sense that he does that, right? God. Best Jeanist! What the hell is Best Jeanist's neck? Best Jeanist must have the longest neck. I feel like that's a running joke, because when he has that like high collar later on, I feel like Best Jeanist, we've never seen his neck. It's just naturally freakishly long. He looks like Falco off Attack on Titan. And it's just like, what the hell's happening? And Hawk's like, sorry, I had to nap. And Best Jeanist is like, oh my God, really? Without the medical technology we have at Central, you'd be wandering the halls of death. And so this is the part, I was talking about this in the spoiler corner, back when Best Jeanist first shows back up. I wouldn't have undergone surgery to be in a state of temporary death. This is, of all the plot lines in My Hero Academia, this is the one plot line that I'm like, Horikoshi wrote himself into a corner, and so then he was like, I'm gonna write myself out of it, right? Because basically what he's saying is that Best Jeanist was put into a temporary state of death, inspired by the Nomus. That's where we make the connection. Inspired by the Nomus, so it all makes sense. He was put in this temporary state of death to convince Dabi, right? To convince Dabi that this is what was going to happen. And then the League wouldn't have been convinced with a cheap trick, which is true. I honestly think originally Horikoshi was like, yep, we're going to kill Best Jeanist and make Hawks a much more gray character. And then as time went on and Horikoshi was scripting, he was like, I actually need Best Jeanist to be in this story, because there's a lot of plot things that Best Jeanist would be really good with, pun intended, wrapping up. So he's like, I need to bring him back, but how do I do that? And so he came up with this. That's my theory. I could be wrong, but I think Horikoshi kind of wrote himself into a corner and was like, crap, I need to bring Best Jeanist back to make this fit better. We're going to make it work. That's my theory anyway. It's probably the weakest plot point of the season. I've never been a big fan of it. I kind of wanted Best Jeanist to be gone and be like, I thought it could have had ramifications for Bakugo, could have made the story a lot more darker, but you know what? I'm okay. In pure comic book tradition, we bring heroes back from the dead quite frequently, at least in Western comic tradition. So I'm fine with it. It's always kind of set like with me, but I'm okay with it. And then I don't think this was in the manga, seeing the tank that Best Jeanist was in. I don't think they ever showed us that. That might be like a anime only thing. But then Hawks is like, oh yeah, I just got you out whenever it was convenient. I'm like, when was it convenient? When did you do that? When did that happen? Because again, that doesn't quite match the timeline. I'm like, he was with the League of Villains like most of the time. Did he leave, go do that, and come back before the war broke out? When did Hawks have time to go do that? So again, doesn't quite add up, but I'm okay with it. I do like the sweet Batmobile that Best Jeanist drives. Like, I figured it'd be like a denim colored Volkswagen Beetle, if I'm being honest. If I could picture Best Jeanist driving anything. The black car that they're driving fits Hawks very well. I always pictured Best Jeanist like driving a Volkswagen Beetle. I don't know why. It just fits his personality with denim clad seats, right? So the interesting commentary, though, that Horikoshi makes throughout this part of the episode is with the goons. See, it's so interesting because now things have gotten chaotic, right? Not only is there the chaos from all the damage Gigantomachia caused, but now these villains have broken out of prison and Hero Society in Japan is just at this all-time unrest. There's all this chaos and nobody really knows what to do. And heroes are retiring one by one. Like the fact that the number one hero, Musha, retires. It's like, because he's just like, I can't do it anymore. And so this Hero Society is just kind of in a state of distress about it all. And what's interesting is the commentary Horikoshi makes about the support items and about civilians using them. Because it's been set up. Like, this is not something that Horikoshi just made up. He has carefully laid the groundwork since, like, season 3 into season 4 with this, right? Because we have there's a whole class of UA kids, the 1C class, that are just tech support people. They just work on tech. The one girl, she has the pink hair, and I can't think of her name to save the life of me right now, but that's always, like, landing on Deku. She's a support item creator. So there's this whole subplot that Horikoshi is just now bringing the dark side of to the forefront, that these support items have been a major part of Hero Society throughout the entire series. But now that heroes are starting to leave and that villains are on the rise and that there's so much chaos and confusion, it now comes to pass that we see kind of the dark side of the support item, agenda. Because Redestro's been passing out support items left and right like they're candy, probably to create this scenario and fester it even more. But the part that's interesting is like when Wash comes to like get involved, right? That we have the civilians saying that they don't need heroes anymore. And I'll jump ahead to Wash's storyline real quick and touch base on it. But poor Wash. I felt bad for Wash. Wash is trying to do their job, trying to be a hero, and gets there too late and the civilians are so awful. They make Wash out to be like late and like gallivanting around, and Wash is like, there's not enough heroes to cover all this ground. I'm having to do double duty. I'm spreading myself thin. And the problem is that the civilians using the support items are causing more harm than good because they're not trained in how to use them. And so they're causing more damage than helping the situation. And I feel like that's Horikoshi's very subtle commentary, not on gun control or anything, but it almost, when the manga came out, I was like, there was lots of shootings and stuff going on locally in the United States when these chapters came out. And I was like, this feels like a commentary about that and about gun ownership. It feels like it just, I don't want to get political in this episode, but it just feels like it because in this world specifically, we've set up several seasons where we establish that the heroes have to take an exam, they have to go through training, they have so many regulations on how to use their quirks and when to use their quirks. They have to go through, like, how do we evacuate? How do we save people? How do we do first aid? Like, there's all this training they have to go through to be able to mentally handle a situation like this and to mentally and physically be able to do the best possible. And so when you just hand out weapons and support items to people that aren't trained, that are just using it based on emotion, then it leads to bad things happening. And so I feel like, personally, that's Horikoshi making a little mild commentary about that. Just setting that on the table and being like, here's what we know. And just going with it, right? They don't dwell too much on it, but as a manga reader, when those chapters came out, I was like, yep, this feels like a commentary. And it's done very subtly. It's not like beating you over the head with it or preaching, but it's just saying, like, yeah, no, these people weren't trained. They didn't know how to handle the situation. They used these items emotionally, and it ended up making the situation worse. And there we go. So I do feel bad for Wash, though. I'm like, dang. And the fact that we get confirmation that the Nomus, like, all of that's been around since season 1, I do appreciate that Horikoshi at this point in the story is taking elements that have set up from the beginning and is now bringing them back to the forefront and saying, yeah, remember when I set this one thing up? Now we're going to talk about it. So I do appreciate that. But we go back to the home, and it's the Ukai residence. In my headcanon, I like to imagine that Kigo's mom remarried Coach Ukai from IQ. And that's the scenario, but obviously not. That's probably her maiden name. And Tamaki was the dad's name, right? But this is where Hawks, like, figures out that apparently the League of Villains, they strong-armed his mom into giving information. The thing about it is, he does bring up a good point. He's like, well, I thought all this information was, that my mom and all the information was hidden, that her record was erased, everything was hidden. So how they got a hold of this information is still quite mysterious, but it doesn't change the fact of the matter that Dabi went and kind of confronted his mom and kind of prodded her for information, right? Or at least sent some goons to go do it instead. And so she told them all she knew. She didn't know anything else to do. And I like that Hawk says that he's glad that his mom wrote him the letter and came to terms. And she apologized and says she's so proud of him. But I think that he's glad that this moment has happened because it reminded him of Twice being like, look, these people that are doing bad things are driven by something. And he's like, I'm not innocent. He's like, I abandoned my mom. I killed Twice. I like that he says that he draws inspiration from Twice. Being like, Twice, for all the bad things that he did, was still trying to help people. At the end of the day, he was still trying to help people in his own way. He went about it the wrong way, and there are lots of flaws in his means, but Hawks is like, he was still trying to do right by himself. And I like that Hawks is like, I draw inspiration from Twice and Endeavor, being like, I'm not perfect. I'm from a shady, dark past. I have that darkness in me. He's like, I've killed a man, but I'm going to keep doing what I think is right to try to help others. Like, it's so interesting, and it fits Hawk's character so well that he's just like, I'm glad. He's like, just like how Endeavor saved me, can I make the world brighter for everyone else? He's like, my own actions came back to bite me. He's like, I abandoned my mom to try to save others, and it's all come back to bite me in the end. So he's like, I like that Hawks, rather than wallowing in despair, like what Endeavor seems to be doing, he's like, no, I messed up. Now I gotta fix it. What do I need to do moving forward? I like that. I like that Hawk's like, nope, gotta do it. And his poor wings, he doesn't have his wings. It's just like little bumps there. Poor Hawks. Just a flightless bird trying to figure out what to do now, right? And Best Genius is just like, well, here we go. Although, him taking off the mask is kind of comical, right? Because he sounded like Batman. Obviously, the most important scene to me in this whole episode with Hawks' flashback, I mean, there's so many good moments, but what gets me is the scene where his mom takes him to go get the Endeavor doll. And in the manga, it hits so hard. They almost gloss over it in the anime, and I was just like, no, let that sink in. But which I guess it's a lot of show and not tell, but she takes him to the bargain bin, right? the Endeavor dolls are really expensive because he's the number one hero. But the number two hero, there's like a sale and they're only like 500 yen. They're pretty cheap. And she just takes him and tells him not to tell his dad, takes him to the bargain bin to get him something to shut him up as a kid so that he wouldn't go outside. Like, here's a toy, play with this, don't go outside. And she gets this like 500 yen toy. And I think the All Might ones were like 3,200 yen. They were like triple the price or quadruple or whatever. But the Endeavor dolls were cheap. And she got him one to satisfy him. And the idea that Hawk's getting this little bargain doll, that's what inspires him, and that Endeavor becomes his hero because of it. And as a kid, he doesn't realize. It means so much, right? It just shows like the impact something so little like that can have. And I like that Hawk says when people are cornered or when they become free, that's when their true natures come out. And he's like, yeah, that's kind of the situation was with Twice. He's like, that's why Twice was a good guy. He was still at the end of the day wanting to help the people he cared about. Setting aside whether his actions were right or wrong, he was desperately trying to help others. And so Hawks is like, that's kind of where I'm at. He's like, I know some of the actions I've taken haven't maybe been right, but he's like, at the end of the day, I'm just trying to help people. So he's like, I need to tie up all my loose ends, and I need to go help the man that inspired me, which is Endeavor. So again, if you ship Endeavor and Hawks, okay, sure, I get it. It's too much of an age difference for me. I can't see around it. And plus, I kind of ship Dobby and Hawks, so because we'll probably talk next episode about it. But it's, you know, I do like that Hawks connects himself to Endeavor and wants to like help make that family better. He's inserted himself into the Todoroki family. I'm like, kudos to you, because that family's full of a lot of drama. So I'm glad you feel like you need to. We even get Cider House in this. It's been a while since we've seen him. I was like, he looks so familiar. He was like way back from an earlier season. And that's when we get the whole Wash storyline. I do love that they're talking about how, you know, everybody's kind of abandoned heroes because of All Might. I love that visual that we cut to Stain in the warehouse and he's dragging his feet across the ground. It's so good. I love that. But I love Stain like finding the old sword and he's like slowly creeping through everything. And looking and finding the old rusty sword. How many heroes are being winnowed out? I love that shot of Stain. It's so good. Get him back in this. Horikoshi does something funny where they like make some of the doctor characters look like Super Mario Brothers characters. Like there's been a doctor that looks like Mario in the past, and now we have Toadstool. It's great. But man, I'm gonna just point out, you know, in this hospital, you got a big wide room. I know you want Endeavor to have some sunlight on him, but they just like wheeled him conveniently towards the window so you could see the public like shaming him. I was like, you could have backed that, you know, bed up a little bit so he wasn't like totally enveloped in trauma, but you do you, My Hero Academia. Just like you got a lot of space there. Didn't have to put the bed right by the window, but okay. And then man, like I said, I'm not a big Endeavor fan, honestly. I love the visual symbolism of how Endeavor and Hawks relate to each other in terms of Hawks' origin. I do appreciate that, and I like Hawks' connection to Endeavor quite a bit. It's symbolically and thematically really beautiful. But Endeavor as a character has never been my favorite. So I do admit that I get a little bit of satisfaction seeing him suffer a little bit, because I'm like, you were a dick the first several seasons and now you're atoning, so you know, good. But then it's really sad because you see Dobby like laughing because he can't cry, and it's like, oh yeah, this is really sad actually. But I do feel for Endeavor as much as I'm not crazy about Endeavor. I do feel for him because he's realizing now that he can't fight his sons. He can't do it. He can't fight Dobby. And again, there's that parallel because Dobby says in the video he was abandoned and forgotten. It's kind of like a reverse scenario where you talk about Hawks feeling bad because he abandoned his mother. Endeavor's now feeling bad because he feels like he abandoned Dobby. So you have Hawks and Endeavor connecting in that regard as well. So that's interesting. But yeah, we get a little preview of Dobby ripping at his hair that's turned white. Oof. I love it. Again, spoiler corner. But he's like, even if I survive this, he thinks that Endeavor's dead. He's kind of in the same position Musha is. They talked about how middle-aged heroes were having a lot of hardship because they've been working they've been on the job so long, and now it's all coming crashing down. For Musha, it was just the pressure of the situation with everything outside. For Endeavor, it's all internally. He's like, how can I be a hero when I can't fight a villain that's doing so much damage? And it's because it's his son, right? And Endeavor's just like so sad in this moment, and he's starting to tear up and cry. He's like, I cannot fight my own son. That page in the manga always got me. And then we cut to Shoto, and Shoto's like, don't know how to deal with this emotional situation. Bye. Because that is like Shoto and Natsu and Fumi have never seen their father cry. They've never seen him be sad. How do you deal with this? How do you process this? If your family is the type where your parents never cry or show emotion, and suddenly they do, it's like, how do we process this? What do we do? My parents are very, very strong, strong-willed people, and I've only seen them cry a handful of times. Like, I can count on one hand. And the times that I've seen them be emotional like that, I'm kind of like, I don't know what to do with this, because you don't think of your parents like that. It's like, ugh. And so Shoto, him just being like he almost says dad. And then, Endeavor looks over with tears in his eyes, looking the most pitiful. And Shoto's like, yep, nope. I love he just slams the door shut, and then the Shoto! The anime, it's worth it to see it animated for that moment. It's so good. His kid's just standing there like, nope, don't want to see our dad like this. Nope. And then the door opens back up. And I like that, Shoto can't even look. Shoto can't look at his father like this. Natsu has the most complicated relationship with his dad, and he's like, I can't look at this. And Fuyumi's like, okay, you two, I got this. Fuyumi's like the big sister, being like, okay, dad. And we can see each other. And Endeavor's like, are you two all right? And Natsu's like, what are you crying about? Natsu's like, why are you crying? He's still on the defense. And then Endeavor just breaks down. Just has a meltdown and apologizes. And Fumi's like, oh my gosh. And Natsu, he's like, it was too late. And Natsu's like, yeah. He's like, my regret and my guilt. He's like, I can't. He's like, what do I do with this? He's like, my heart. Everything's broken. And I love that Ray's like, what about your heart? Ray coming in and being like, it's that moment where, you have two parents, and the one parent's always really tough, and the other one's kind of seems more fragile. But when it reverses and the tough one breaks down, the other one gets strong for them. That's how I feel Ray and Inji are in this moment, where she's like, what about your heart? She's like, what about it? She's like, oh, are you feeling bad? Let's talk about that. I love her just walking in like a badass with the flower that he gave her. The flower, it's almost an anchor for her, being like, okay, I'm going to talk to him. Because this is the first time they've spoke in years to each other. Years. The last time he saw her, she was traumatized. So she's using that flower as strength and being like, I'm going to talk to this man who has done so much wrong and has abused me and my kids. She's like, nah. I love that she's almost like, you don't get to just be sad. No, this family's gone through hell. You need to sit down and shut up for a second. I love that attitude she has. The hellish Todoroki family indeed. She's like, regret and guilt, we feel it all much more than you do. I love Ray being like, oh, you feel guilty about Toya? You feel, regret? What about the rest of us? You need to sit down and shut up for a second, Endeavor. I love Ray. And I love that Shoto with his hand on her back, supporting her. Shoto like supporting his mom, and then Natsu looking back at her and Fuyumi being like, mom's gonna pop off, we're just gonna let this happen. I love this. And of course, yeah, and Endeavor looks so pitiful being like, oh, my wife's here to give me a scolding. Yep. He's like, what are you doing here? She's like, I came to talk to you because we need to have a family chat. And then we cut back Dabi real quick. She's like, we need to talk about our family and we need to talk about Toya. I love that we've got the kids here with her. The Hellish Todoroki family part 2. Yep. God, Ray being strong and coming up and being like, no, you're going to need to get your act together. Let's stop this now, shall we? I love it so much. I've been waiting to see Ray pop off, and it's been so satisfying so far. And now we have next episode where we actually have the talk. So, I don't have a lot of spoilers I want to talk about, but I do want to talk about a couple real quick like. So we're going to have a little quick spoiler corner. But if you're not sticking around for that, I really enjoyed this episode. As traumatic and sad as it is, I'm very happy with how the content they were able to put into this episode. It's really great. I feel like the title of it fits because even though we didn't get a lot with the Todoroki family, I feel like Hawks is kind of like an adopted member by proxy. So it's all ties together in the end. But I want to talk a little bit about spoilers. So if you're not sticking around for that, I hope y'all enjoyed this reaction and discussion. I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and I'll be back next week with episode 17. So this episode, again, if you're sticking around for spoilers, it was a really good adaptation. The stuff with Kigo took up like a chapter. I'm glad that they did that whole chapter in this episode. It didn't feel rushed. I'm glad that they did a lot of the emotional beats. Worked really well. Adding the stuff with Washin was really good. I can't recall if they switched stuff around. I feel like the pacing and the way that they laid out this episode worked very, very well. I liked it a lot. Getting Kigo's backstory and how, again, connects to Endeavor, which, whether you ship Hawks with Endeavor or Dabi, he's basically an adopted member of the Todoroki family. Hawks is like that adopted member. And it's going to be so hilarious next episode if we're getting Toya's backstory. Because if I'm remembering correctly, Hawks goes to visit Endeavor and he just kind of inserts himself into the family. Like, sup, hey, Endeavor, Papa Endeavor, your kid Dabi. No matter how you ship it, Hawks inserts himself into the family. And I like Shoto and everybody's kind of like, I guess we'll include you. I guess you can join us. Tamaki, Todoroki, just join on in the family. It's great. But there's not a whole lot to talk about in terms of spoilers. Obviously, I'm really excited to get Dabi's backstory and that relation with Endeavor. I'm really excited to see Ray just be like, get yourself together, pick yourself off the floor. We've dealt with worse. Now you're getting a taste of it. Boo-hoo, play your violin, let's go. I love that, right? The stuff with Stain being set up, of Stain. I keep thinking Stain's gonna have that talk with All Might. The OP, I'm sure everybody that's anime only is like, oh, is Deku going to be in a coma this entire rest of the season? No, I don't want to hype up like depressed Deku too much because I feel like it's already happened. I feel like everybody has hyped up the emo Deku arc. I didn't think it was anything. I think the artwork is what really sold me on that arc because it was around the time that the mangaka for Berserk passed away. And I remember making a Tumblr post about it that I felt like Horikoshi was paying homage to Berserk's mangaka because the way that the way that Deku looks in that arc against Lady Nagant, all that, the outlining and the art style reminded me a lot of The Dark Knight, reminded me a lot of Guts in Berserk. From what I've seen, I've not read or watched Berserk. I've only seen some images. And when the mangaka died, people were putting like panels of the manga out and they looked absolutely gorgeous. So I felt like that art style was very similar intentionally to pay homage. Do I think Bones will do it justice? You need to go see the manga, honestly, because the manga, Horikoshi's artwork is so beautiful in those chapters with Deku. I feel like that's where people are hyping it up because it stylistically looks so good. I mean, story-wise, Deku has a depressed time, and it's sad, but I don't think it's the end-all, be-all, best part of the arc, so I'm afraid people are hyping it up way too much, and then the anime-only people are going to be like, oh, that's it? That's what I'm afraid of. Although, the bento box lunch scene with All Might is so freaking sad, and I'm not ready for that, but we'll get to it. But yeah, I do like the Todoroki family drama is always some of my favorite because it feels so, it's not cliche, but it just feels like it's that emotional family arc that kind of reels you into a character. And you do feel for Dabi by the end of what I feel is going to be the next episode. And there's a lot of stuff that I want to talk about that I feel like needs to save until that arc, until we see the episode animated, right? But, oh man. And plus there's an image of Shoto as a baby that I'm hoping they animate properly because he looks so derpy. I feel for Shoto in this moment though, because Shoto's kind of like doesn't know how to deal with his dad right now. He's like, I've had all these emotions towards my father, and now seeing him completely have an emotional breakdown does things, right? But, oh man. I just, looking at the ED now, it's funny because I don't know, it's interesting. I always shipped like Shoto with Momo for the longest time, but I always had the headcanon that if they had a kid, it would just be quirkless. And I honestly think if Shoto has any kids, like for a future generation, I want them to be quirkless. I don't want them to have a quirk. And I think that would be funny for Endeavor to be, if he lives through this final arc, I would love Endeavor to be like a grandpa to like a quirkless kid and him be totally fine with that. That's what I want, if anything. But I don't even know if Shoto's going to have a relationship. You know, he's kind of... It's funny. I've had friends whose parents have had really bad marriages and really bad relationships. And the idea of marriage for them kind of has a negative connotation. So a lot of my friends that are in long-term relationships, they aren't married because they're just like, don't want to have that stigma or have that barrier there. So it wouldn't surprise me if Shoto just ends up being a bachelor. I don't know. But yeah, there weren't a lot of spoilery things with this episode. I've talked about them pretty much in the episode itself. Again, the Best Gina storyline, it's fine. In hindsight now, if you're reading where the manga is now, the whole thing with Ed Shot and Best Jeanist that comes out of nowhere, I feel like I think Horikoshi made the right decision in the end of having Best Jeanist be alive because of the impact he plays for the rest of the series. But it almost does feel like he made a decision and then kind of regretted it and was like, okay, I'm going to backtrack and just kind of erase that mistake, right? It works. I'm fine with it, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts down below. But next episode should be a lot of fun. So I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe. Take care. And yes, I'll be back next week with episode 17 of My Hero Academia. Bye.